Good afternoon. This is Papa G and welcome to Papa Can Cook. Today we're going to be making something that's very interesting. It's a Italian baguette. Now it is gluten-free, dairy-free, low glycemic sugar, and low carbohydrate. It's a paleo recipe. I'll be using a recipe from this book, My Paleo Patisserie by Jenny Hulette. It was a gift that I got about 6 months ago. And as you can tell from all the bookmarks that I have in it, I spent a lot of time in this book reading it and trying some of the recipes. It's based on a type of pastry. It's called a pâte chaud, if my high school French serves me correctly. And it's made with some very different ingredients. It includes coconut flour, a little bit of coconut flour. This is organic, gluten-free, and it includes arrowroot flour. I don't have the original bag. Coconut flour you can usually get in your local supermarket. Bob's Red Mill has a version. And just check to make sure it's gluten-free. Bob's Red Mill is. Arrowroot flour I had to purchase online and had it shipped here from Amazon. Again, check that it's gluten-free. Arrowroot flour is a very interesting type of flour. It is a substitute for gluten in its nature when you put it into a recipe, and you will see what it does with this baguette. We're going to be using shortening. This is a organic palm shortening. It's sustainable. It is certified rainforest by the Rainforest Alliance. You know, there's controversy about using palm oil because of the effect on the habitats of orangutans. But this is not harvested in a way that hurts orangutans. So we'll be using some of that. We'll be using some full-fat coconut milk. Make sure you get the full-fat coconut milk, not the light coconut milk. We're going to be using coconut palm sugar here. You could use this or maple sugar, but we're going to be using this here. This is low glycemic. We're going to be using a little bit of salt in the recipe. And we're going to be using eggs. The eggs have to be at room temperature. I took these out a few hours ago. You want to let them come to room temperature. The temperature of what you do with this recipe is very important. Okay, so that's all our ingredients. And next, I'll show you how we make it. It is a little involved. This is not an easy recipe, and it requires some technique, but I'll show you how to do it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put the flours together, the sugar and the salt. Since this is a bread, I'm not just going to use a measuring cup. I'm going to weigh it. So I have a scale here that I'm going to turn on. I'm going to put a bowl on it and then zero that out. And then I'm going to put the arrowroot flour in. Now it's nominally a cup of arrowroot flour, which is 120 grams. Let me change this to grams. And if you're going to be baking any kinds of breads or pastries or anything like that, you should definitely invest in a scale. Okay, 120 grams. I'm going to put that in my bowl. A lot of times the ratios of these flours is very important. So that's the arrowroot flour. And then I'm going to put, it's a smaller amount, so this I can put in the way it is. Let me just get something to, all right, that's a going to use 2 tablespoons of coconut flour. We're going to use 1 teaspoon, and I'm using coconut sugar in here in this recipe. You can use maple sugar also. And a pinch of salt. And then I'm going to whisk this together to blend it. And set that aside. This next step has to be done by the stove. We're going to combine some of the other ingredients. We're going to take a third of a cup of the palm shortening. And put that in the saucepan. We're going to add to that a half a cup of the full fat coconut milk. Shake it up well before you open it, because the cream tends to float to the top, and you really want to have it all, the cream mixed in with the liquid. So shake that up well. And I'll put a half a cup of that in the saucepan. I always take what's left over whenever I have a recipe like this. I'll put it in the mason jar, close it up, put it in the refrigerator. This coconut milk is, if you have another recipe that requires it, that's great. But it's also great to add to eggs when you make omelets. Instead of half and half, if you want to be dairy free, you could add this, and it's a nice substitute. And then I have a quarter cup of water, filtered water, that I'm going to put in here. And then I'm going to turn this on medium-high heat. Keep an eye on it. You want it to melt. You want to use a whisk here to mix it together. As soon as you start, you don't want it to boil completely. As soon as you start to see the bubbles arise, just prior to boiling, that's when you want to turn it off. Again, this recipe is very sensitive to the temperatures. The temperature of this will determine how many eggs will go into the recipe in the next step. So I'm going to let this heat up. Just before it starts to boil, when I start to see the first bubbles start to rise, I'm going to turn it off, take it off the heat, and let it cool down for a little while. Okay, it had just prior to boiling, some of the bubbles started to rise. I shut it off, took it off of the heat, and I just let it sit there for not even a minute. The next step is to take the flour that you had mixed together in the prior step and slowly add it to the mixture and immediately start to stir it. And as you stir it, if you don't stir it too hard so that you don't end up with flour all over the place, it will come together and form kind of a ball, a sticky ball. So mix it together as well as you can. Scrape the sides, make sure you have all the dry flour mixed in with it. You'll see that it's extremely sticky. That's the arrowroot flour. If you use arrowroot flour in any recipes, you will see that this is what it does. And this is what holds it together and allows the air bubbles to form inside to make the baguette. All right, so basically this is what it looks like. There's a ball of this in here, and then I'll show you the next step. I've taken the dough that was in the saucepan. I scraped it out of the pan into the bowl of my stand mixer. I had to use a metal spatula to get it out because it's extremely sticky. So I wanted to make sure I got it all in here. I'm using a paddle attachment on this. So the first thing I'm going to do is raise this up and turn it on just the way it is. That will tend to cool it down a little bit. I don't want it to be too hot. Because the next step is to put eggs in. I don't want the eggs cooking really well. Okay, now what I've done with the eggs is I've taken 3 of the 4 eggs and I took 1 egg at a time and beat it into a little bowl. The reason I use 3 is depending on the heat will determine how many eggs it requires. So I found from experience it usually only takes 3. So rather than waste an egg, although we will use it for the coating later on, the egg wash later on, I just started out with 3. So this is the first egg. So you put the egg in, and what will happen is it will kind of come apart in the bowl. I'm going to raise up the speed a little bit. It'll come apart, and then as the egg gets incorporated, it'll come back together into a ball. So you want to wait until it does that, and once it's done that, you're going to add another egg. Okay, it's starting to coalesce. Okay, now it's come back together, and it's in a ball in the bowl of the mixer, stand mixer. Lower the speed just a little bit so I don't wear the egg. And I'm going to put the second egg in. And we're going to do the same thing. It's going to come apart, then it's going to coalesce into a ball again, at which time we'll put the third egg in. All right, I've put the third egg in. I let it separate, coalesce. It's now a very silky, smooth, sticky glob in the bowl. The way the author describes it in the book to determine if it's good enough is to take a little bit between your 2 fingers, and then it should have the same consistency as chewing gum sitting on a hot sidewalk in the summer. You can see how it's holding together into threads. That's perfect. That's what it should be like. Let me get it off my fingers. I'm going to now take the paddle out, clean it, and I'll show you the next step, which is going to require that we pipe it onto a pan rimmed baking sheet covered with parchment paper. Now we're going to pipe the dough onto a rimmed baking sheet that I've lined with parchment paper. Now, if you have a large size pastry bag with a large opening that you could use without a tip, you can do that. You need really about a 2-inch opening. I find I do have a pastry bag set, but it's smaller. What I find is I use a 1 gallon Ziploc bag, and I cut the corner so it's about 2 inches long. Now, if you've never done this before, the easiest way to do it without making a total mess is to put it in a large drinking glass, and then that will hold it, because otherwise you need 3 hands. And then what I'm going to do is and I'm using tablespoons, metal tablespoons, because it's very difficult to work with anything flexible when it comes to this here. And I'm going to put the dough in the bag, which is in the drinking glass. Put about half of it in. You don't want to overstuff the bag. Then I'm going to zip it up so it stays in the bag. And I'm going to squeeze it from one end to move it down towards the corner that you cut. Once you get it there, you turn this around, you're going to pipe about, I would say it's about maybe a 12-inch long piece of it. So it's about 2 inches, as you see, in diameter. Okay, that's one. I'm going to put this back in here so I can fill it again for the second baguette. Okay, I've piped the two baguettes out onto the pan. As you can see, I didn't get the the apportionment correct, so this one here is a little shorter than that one. So just try and if you want them to be the same length, try and make sure you take only half of it out in the bag at a time. Now what I'm going to do is I took that last egg and I beat it with about a tablespoon of water, and I'm going to use my pastry brush and I'm going to brush it on the top. And then I'm going to, and this is optional, you don't have to do this, but I like to make it a little interesting. I'm going to sprinkle some sesame seeds on the top. Okay, now I have the oven already preheated to 400 degrees. You're going to put it in, I'm going to put it in at 400 degrees. After 15 minutes, you bring it down to 350. And I'll take some pictures along the way so you see how this rises. If you look at this now, you say, how is this possibly going to turn into a baguette? But it's amazing. You'll see.